Hi, this is Bighara, and on today's video blog, I'm going to be doing a review of Jonathan Becker's new book from Running Beagle called The BX Companion. The BX Companion is intended as sort of a third book to go with the Tom Mulvey Basic and David Cook Expert Dungeons and Dragons books from the 1980s. Companion being companion levels, which are higher level games or higher level characters. 15th level and up in this case. And I've been looking forward to this book for a little while and was very excited to get my copy last week, and I read through it, and so I thought we'd go ahead and go through the review. Here we go. Okay, first impressions. This book was obviously deliberately laid out and modeled after the style and design of the Basic and Expert D&D books from the 1980s. Things like the page count, the overall size and layout is very similar. It even follows the same breakdown of sections. You have your introduction, you have your character info, followed by things like spells, and then information about doing the adventure and everything else. It's very nice and cleanly laid out. It's two-column format, nice, easy to read text, nicely spaced together and all that. Nice detailed table of contents. Actually, I think JB has posted in a recent blog post a screen capture of the table of contents. I'll put a link in the description of the video for him and for that, so you can take a look at it. The tables are nice and easy to read. They're very simple in layout, not a lot of fancy shading or anything, but nice clean grid and all that. So I didn't really have any problems with following along with the text or with the tables and things like that. The only thing I noticed, which was this was me, unlike the Basic and Expert books, he didn't have the printing 3-hole punched, which the old books were, so you could just stick them into a binder, which I always kind of liked because you could just carry a binder with you. So the cover art, which you should have seen in the little image I popped up there, it doesn't look exactly like the Basic and Expert books, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I like that it has a little bit of its own look. There's a lot of elements to it. The little corner bar, the number 3 on the corner there, the font of the title and everything is very evocative of that style. And I like the cover picture. It's very cool. I like the fact it shows the idea of, these are people who are things like, dukes and kings and advisors to kings and that sort of thing. And they're not just dungeon crawlers, which is sort of the point of the higher level plays, that you're in the old school games, you're moving past just, going to the dungeon and looking for treasure. There's sometimes there's bigger fish to fry, or there's different kinds of adventures, and that's a plus. So overall impressions of layout and organization, I give it 4 out of 5 gold pieces. Okay, moving on to the actual content of the book. There's, of course, like I say, it follows the organization of the previous TSR editions of the Basic and Expert D&D. So you have your introduction, obviously. He spends a couple paragraphs talking a little bit about high-level play in particular, which I thought was a good idea and useful. And then goes on to some of the defining of certain terms, which I kind of felt was a little bit unnecessary, because if you're using this book, I don't know that you really need things like level defined for you, or to explain when someone says 3d6 what they mean. So, but again, it was something that was very much how it was done in the earlier books, so it was following that model. But anyway, moving on from the introduction, it goes into character info. And this isn't about creating a character, because the idea is this is a character that's already reached higher levels. And it talks about each of the classes, your cleric, magic user, thief, fighter, halfling, dwarf, elf. And it discusses a little bit about what's different for them at these higher levels. And there's a lot of little things like fighters getting multiple attacks and stuff like that, so it makes them more dangerous as combatants, but not everything's just about combat, which I really liked. A good example is clerics with their turning undead. There's a scaling going on there where it's not just a question of you get more and more likely to turn them, but there's also how much you can turn, things like that. And I also like the fact that in his rules, there are actually some undead that are so powerful they cannot be turned, which I thought was very cool. One of my favorite parts was how he dealt with the thief, And again, don't want to give everything away. He adds not only their skill improvements, but also they get things like their backstab gets a little better, but there's also new skills, things that you wouldn't be able to do as a common low-level thief. But when you get into that master thief realm, you might have interesting options to choose from. And it talks about ways to keep the demi-humans improving even after their level caps. Similar to the rules cyclopedia where they have the attack ranks, but I found it more simplified and easier to follow. Then it goes on into spells, and instead of repeating all the spells from the lower levels there, he just talks about the higher level spells that the characters would not have been able to get to up through like 14th level. So these are things like, 6th and 7th level clerical spells and 8th and 9th level magic user spells and things like this. And he also adds a few spells here and there. And he doesn't repeat all the spell descriptions, only the spell descriptions for the new ones, which I thought was good. But he does give you a list of all the spells. If you were going to use this in like a Labyrinth Lord game and you wanted to use your AEC with it, or even just the core rules, you may have to go through and look at one or two things and decide just which way you want to go with it. But I don't think it would take an awful lot of work. And so character advancement stuff, I give it 5 out of 5. It was a really good section. Okay, and moving on. After spells, he goes into some of the adventuring rules. The one I really wanted to talk about that was very interesting was his mass land combat rules, so for armies and stuff like that. Mass combat's a real tricky one to do well, in my opinion, for RPGs. I mean, you have all the war games out there, like Warhammer Fantasy Battle and Chainmail and things like that, and that's what their job is. Their Warlord from Reaper is a good one for skirmish level and things like that. But to do it in an RPG is tricky because there's always that balance between, do I need a million minis? How detailed are the rules? Am I doing point builds for armies? Or just being totally abstract and saying, well, let's just say that your army's worth 6 and his is worth 7, and then we'll just roll some dice. I think Jonathan did a really good job here. I really enjoyed the mass combat rules. I haven't had a chance to play test them, but reading through them, I thought they struck a really good balance between keeping it relatively abstract, so you're not worrying about having a bunch of minis on the table. It's not a miniatures battle system, but allowing for real differences in troop strength and things like that. From there, he goes on into monsters. Again, he's not, like with spells, he's not repeating all the low-level stuff from before, because, why would you? It would just take up space. A lot of the monsters he's giving you are, bigger and more powerful and badder, but there's also instead of just bigger and meaner, some of them are very epic and supposed to be very scary. You've got things I mentioned before where in his companion rules, there are certain undead like licks and stuff like that, which are just, you can't turn them. A cleric, no matter what level, is never going to turn this. They're just too powerful. He also includes some things which I thought were interesting, like the Beasts of Legend, which are sort of paragons of certain beasts, and he gives you some advice about creating other ones. The Ruinous Powers, those were a lot of fun. Things like the Kraken and things. These aren't just something like, oh, it's a giant octopus. No, this is a unique or semi-unique creature, which is, something that's just a terrifying and really epic monster to face. He has rules about making dragons more powerful. I think it's Ancient Worm, he calls it. So there are lots of fun things in there. They're not necessarily totally invincible, but they're obviously something that would be far more than just simply saying, it's just like the monster you faced when you were 8th level. It just has twice as many hit die. So those sections I thought were really neat to see on how he handled scaling things up without just, like I say, just adding hit points or making armor class tougher. So, I give that a good 4 out of 5 for those sections there. From there, he goes on into some treasure tables and new items and things like that, which is really interesting. I think he, by the way, a treasure hoard is H-O-A-R-D, not H-O-R-D-E. H-O-R-D-E is things like the Mongol horde. Pet peeve of mine, but, I knew what he meant. So, anyway, a lot of neat items in there. Some of them are very subtle. They're not necessarily, again, similar to when we were talking about the monsters getting bigger and just it's not just more hit dice or more damage or something. A lot of the items, it's not just a question of, oh, now this one's +6 or something like that. There's a lot of very neat, subtle items in there that I thought were very interesting. There's some armor that helps close wounds and things like that. It kind of does some healing on its own. There's other things. A lot of interesting stuff in there. Some of it very similar to things that had been done before, I think, in other places. But what I kind of came away with, just looking through those items, where these were things, the vibe was sort of, it would make a character much more impressive. I think it would make a character, give him some or her some very interesting abilities or resources without necessarily just being nothing but becoming more and more badass in combat. That was good. I enjoyed that. And then from there he goes on to talk about running the game and things like the Dominion rules, where you have taxing your land and ruling and things like that. And those I thought were pretty well done. They were very concise. Doesn't go on for chapters and chapters and chapters you have to memorize. It's fairly simplistic and lets you do the job without a lot of extra headache. I would have actually liked a little more detail in there. But like I say, everything you need, I think he covered. And then the last part he talks about running high-level adventures and special adventures for higher-level characters. And this is, again, the first part of this is following the model laid down in the basic and expert books, deciding on the type of adventure and so forth and so on, but with a slant towards high-level play. And then special adventures, things like other planes, other worlds, things like that. Just to give, I think, DMs an idea or ideas to work from, ways to get the creative juices flowing, and think of ways to run games, like I say, that are geared more towards these higher level characters beyond just that much deadlier dungeon crawl. So for those sections there, I give it overall, I would have liked a little more detail. I'd give that 3.5 out of 5 gold pieces. Okay, so finishing up. Overall impressions, and in conclusion, I think it was an excellent piece of work. I think it was very solid. As a big Mulvey Cook Basic Expert fan, I really look forward to kind of keeping this with my books, even if I can't keep it in the binder. Maybe I'll just slip it in a pocket. Anyway, I think Jonathan did a great job at staying very true to the style of Basic Expert. He didn't. It's tough to describe it. There's a definite feel when you read the Basic Expert books. The writing style, the editing style, the organization, the way the material is presented. There's a definite feel to it, which I think is a little bit different than when you look at something like the Basic and Expert books and so forth from the Mensner rules, which are, in terms of the actual mechanics of the rules, extremely similar for the most part. But there's a little bit different feel to the books. I don't think it's a question of one's better than the other necessarily. It's a question of just sort of a question of taste and a question of just like I say, an overall style. And I think Jonathan did a great job of not mimicking that style, but blending with that style and having something that really felt like it belonged with the other books. So, in conclusion, I would give this product an overall rating of 4.5 gold pieces out of 5. And highly recommend you pick it up. Like I said, I'm going to have the link in my blog notes, and you can check it out for yourself. Basic Expert Companion. Good stuff. That's all for now. Talk to you later.